The first-class cabin of Flight 672 was a haven of quiet luxury. Glasses clinked softly with champagne, silk scarves fluttered as passengers adjusted their neck pillows, and high-end tablets displayed silent stock tickers. Everything, from the leather seats to the ambient music, whispered exclusivity. No one expected turbulence, especially not the kind that walks in wearing a hoodie. Jayden Carter stepped aboard with a firm grip on a single worn paperback. Things fall apart, in a spotless pair of white sneakers. He moved differently than most 15-year-olds. Calm, focused, not cocky, not timid, just present. His hoodie was neat, his jeans wrinkle-free, and a pair of matte black Beats headphones rested gently around his neck like a crown of composure. Ticket in hand, he moved with quiet certainty down the first-class aisle. Not a sound from him, just the soft patter of his sneakers on carpet. But the silence from others had changed. A businessman paused mid-sip of his espresso. A woman in a beige trench coat shifted in her seat. No words, just glances. Then came the frowns. Subtle, almost subconscious, but not unnoticed. Jayden had seen those looks before, in classrooms where teachers skipped his raised hand, in parking lots where purses clutched tighter as he walked by. But he kept moving. Seat 2A. His favorite, the window seat just ahead of the wing, where the sunlight caught the edge of the sky before the plane tilted into the clouds. He opened the overhead bin, placed his backpack gently inside, and sat down. No rush to fasten his seatbelt. No desperate scramble for his phone. He just flipped open the book, his fingers naturally returning to a folded page. In that moment, Jayden Carter became invisible, and that was his superpower. In a world that often refused to see him, he had learned to disappear without moving, until she arrived. Her heels clicked against the cabin floor like a judge's gavel on polished wood. Sandra McAllister, blonde bun coiled tight, uniform starched and pristine. Her name tag gleamed like a badge of unquestioned authority. Sandra had served as head flight attendant for 15 years. She didn't just serve the cabin, she owned it. At least, she believed she did. She passed the business class divider with a practiced smile, nodded to a senator in 3C, greeted a retired CEO with a charming, "Lovely to see you again, Mr. Patterson." But then, she stopped, just 3 steps in. Her eyes locked on Jayden, no nod. No welcome, just a long, deliberate stare from top to toe. Jayden didn't flinch. He raised his eyes from the book, met hers, and then, in a gesture that was more battle-hardened than dismissive, returned to reading. Sandra didn't move. Her body stiffened as if her perfectly constructed world had tilted. A black boy in first class. Alone. No blazer. No parent. No explanation. She didn't need to say it. Her expression screamed it, he doesn't belong. She walked over slowly, the edge in her steps as sharp as the tone that followed. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" she asked, her voice pitched just high enough for nearby passengers to hear. Jayden looked up, calm but alert. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his ticket. 2 hands. Respectfully, he extended it toward her without saying a word. Sandra snatched the ticket like she was confiscating contraband. Her eyes scanned the paper, then flicked back to his face. "First class," she said aloud. Not as confirmation, but accusation. "Yes," Jayden replied evenly. "That's right. Are you traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am." That answer, honest and unflinching, twisted something in her. No adult. No chaperone. No visible explanation. Just him. Her voice turned colder. "I think there's been a mistake. This seat is for first-class passengers. Your ticket may have been mixed up, or someone may have transferred it. I'm going to need you to return to the economy section while we verify." Jayden leaned forward slightly. "This is a real ticket, with my name on it. Seat 2A. Her frown deepened. "Listen, I don't know how you got that ticket, but you're causing a disruption to the seating arrangements. If you don't cooperate, I'll have to ask you to move. As per the rules." The word rules echoed louder than intended. But it wasn't about regulations, not really. It was about dominance. About who sets the standard and who must prove they've earned it. Jayden didn't move. His book rested gently on his lap, his phone just beside him on the armrest. He reached for it, casually, just to shift it slightly, and that's when it happened. With a sudden, unprovoked swipe, Sandra slapped his hand. A sharp crack rang out through the cabin. The phone tumbled into his lap. A woman in 1C gasped and covered her mouth. A man behind him cleared his throat. No one said a word. Sandra, exhaling like she had just swatted a fly, said, "Now please move to the back while we sort this out quickly." Jayden didn't shout. He didn't cry. He didn't resist. He just looked at her, really looked at her, longer than most kids his age ever dared to. No fear. No anger. Just disappointment. The kind of disappointment only those who have been hurt by quiet, everyday prejudice could wear so clearly. He pulled his hoodie slightly lower, lifted his backpack, and stood. Step by step, he walked away from the seat he had earned. Not a single passenger spoke. Not one word. The journey from seat 2A to the last row of economy was only a few yards, but it felt like miles. Every row he passed looked away. Every armrest he brushed against creaked with the weight of silence. He reached the final seat, sat down, and let the phone rest in his lap. Then, with fingers still stinging, he typed, "She slapped me. Sent me to the back. I'm in the last row." He hit send and stared out the window. The engines hadn't started yet, but something far greater had just been set into motion. The cabin of Flight 672 remained still, unnaturally so. Somewhere above the soft rumble of pre-takeoff prep, tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. The moment Jayden Carter had typed that message, just 9 words, the fate of the flight shifted, though no one knew it yet. "She slapped me. Sent me to the back. I'm in the last row." That was all it said. But those few words, from a 15-year-old boy sitting alone in the final row of economy, became a spark that would ignite a silent war. In that cramped seat, the one where the tray table stuck and the armrest clicked when leaned on. Jayden stared out the small window, watching sunlight scatter across the tarmac. His phone screen dimmed beside him. He didn't need to stare at it anymore. He had already done what needed to be done. Up front, first class resumed its routine, or at least pretended to. A man in a tailored gray suit unfolded his newspaper but never read it. A woman in pearl earrings tapped her phone repeatedly but didn't send a single message. They were pretending not to have seen what happened. Not the slap. Not the humiliation. Not the way a child had been silently escorted to the back like excess baggage. No one had spoken up. Not a single voice had risen for Jayden. And that silence, not the slap, was what truly hurt. In the galley behind first class, Sandra McAllister poured herself a coffee, one hand steady, the other brushing away invisible lint from her uniform. Her face showed no sign of regret. In her mind, she had corrected a mistake, restored the natural order. Her internal compass, twisted by years of unchallenged authority, told her she had done the right thing. She had done it before, after all. Denied upgrades based on appearance. Moved passengers who didn't look right. And no one ever complained. Why would they? Her instincts were always applauded. She was praised for keeping first class refined. Until now. But this time, she didn't know the boy's name. Or his father's. 800 miles away, in a glass-wrapped corner office on the 57th floor of Carter Tech Tower in Manhattan, Christopher Carter stood at his desk, staring out across a skyline that bowed before him. The room was silent. No ticking clocks. No ringing phones. Only the low hum of power, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. His phone buzzed once that he glanced at the screen. "Jayden, she slapped me. Sent me to the back. I'm in the last row." Christopher didn't flinch. His hands didn't tremble. But something inside him turned cold, not with rage, but precision. He picked up the phone. Not the one on his desk for general calls. Not the conference line. But a small, black personal device known only to a few executives in the aviation world. He pressed a contact marked only with 3 red dots. The call was picked up immediately. A woman's voice, calm and professional, came through. "Carter Air Direct Operations. How may I assist?" Christopher didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "Flight 672. Seat 2A. My son was assaulted. Hold the aircraft. Full stop. Immediate report. No movement until I call back." "Understood, Mr. Carter." He hung up. Then he exhaled, once, and turned to the window again. Back on the plane, Captain Richard Hammond sat in the cockpit, reviewing the flight path when a blinking red icon appeared on the small internal comm screen. He frowned. Class A hold protocol, a term so rare, it hadn't been used in his entire 30-year career without a security threat or board-level override. That a call came through from the ground tower. "Captain Hammond, confirm holding position. No takeoff clearance until further notice." He leaned back in his chair. "Any reason?" "Silence. Classified." the voice replied. Await instructions from corporate. The captain looked at his co-pilot, who raised an eyebrow. Something's up, Hammond muttered. Sandra was back in her element, instructing a junior attendant to restock napkins when the intercom pinged. Ms. McAllister to the cockpit. She paused, just a moment, then straightened her blazer, reapplied her lipstick in the mirror, and marched toward the front. She didn't know yet, but the walls were already closing in. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had shifted. The communication screen blinked to life with a secure video feed. The face of David Harper, CEO of Carter Air Operations, filled the frame. His silver-rimmed glasses caught the reflection of fluorescent lights. His jaw was tight. When Sandra entered, she didn't get a smile. Not a hello, just a cold question. Are you the head flight attendant of Flight 672? Yes, I am, she said confidently. Harper didn't blink. We've received direct instructions from our board chairman, Mr. Christopher Carter, regarding a serious incident involving seat 2A. Sandra's mouth went dry. I thought he was in the wrong seat. Harper leaned forward slightly. No, that boy is Jayden Carter, the son of the man who owns over 60% of our airline. And you slapped him, sent him to the back, publicly humiliated him because you assumed a black kid didn't belong in first class. The cockpit fell silent. Sandra's skin turned pale beneath her makeup. I didn't know, she whispered. Exactly, Harper snapped. You didn't know, but you acted like you did. Captain Hammond stood, arms folded. This flight isn't going anywhere, Harper said, until you apologize to that boy, publicly, in front of every passenger, and escort him back to his seat. Sandra's knees almost buckled. If you refuse, Hammond added, you'll never fly again. Not just today, ever. No passengers knew why the plane hadn't taken off, but a few had started to whisper. Is something wrong with the engine? Why are we delayed? And then, someone stood, from the very back row. Jayden, his phone still face down on his lap. His hand still marked from the slap, but his posture now firm. Eyes clear, shoulders squared. The silence had ended. The tide was turning. And seat 2A, it was still waiting. Sandra McAllister stood in the cockpit, her back straight, but her insides unraveling. She had weathered mid-air emergencies, handled unruly passengers, once even performed CPR at 35,000 feet. But none of that had prepared her for this. Across from her on the cockpit screen, David Harper, the stone-faced CEO of Carter Air's operations, didn't blink. You humiliated a child, he repeated, slow and deliberate. In public, because of an assumption that alone has grounded this aircraft. Sandra tried to steady her breath. I didn't mean to. I thought. You didn't think, Harper interrupted, his voice cold steel. You judged, without asking. You acted as if your authority was absolute. But not today, not anymore. Next to her, Captain Hammond gave a single nod, signaling the conversation was now more than advisory. It was a direct order. Harper leaned closer to the camera. This flight will not depart until you apologize to Jayden Carter in front of every passenger. You will escort him back to his seat, restore his dignity, and show this company you can follow a chain of accountability. Sandra looked down at the cockpit floor, the weight of 15 years of authority tightening around her throat like a noose. If you refuse, Hammond added with finality, this will be your last flight. Permanently. No more routes to Paris. No more galley briefings. No more controlling the air like it belonged to her. Just silence. And Sandra hated silence. She nodded. But it was the slow, broken nod of someone whose foundation had cracked. Someone who realized that the place she once commanded was no longer hers to control. She turned and walked out of the cockpit. The door clicked behind her like the closing of a cell. The walk down the aisle felt longer than any runway she had ever crossed. Her posture remained straight, but each step was heavier than the last. She passed the first-class seats like ghosts, familiar landmarks from a life that now felt distant. Seat 2A still sat vacant. Waiting at a quiet throne left behind as Sandra approached the curtain that divided the cabins. The hum of the plane seemed to hush. Passengers noticed. Phones shifted. Eyes narrowed. One woman subtly pulled down her mask to watch. I in the last row of economy. Jayden Carter was still seated, calm, unreadable. His Beats headphones hung around his neck. His phone lay untouched in his lap. But his eyes, those eyes cut through the aisle like a wire pulled tight. Sandra reached him. "Jayden," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been. He didn't respond. A man across the aisle subtly turned his phone camera toward them. A young woman, 2 rows up, froze mid-scroll on her screen. A child peeked out from behind his mother. Sandra took a breath. "I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier," she said. "I may have judged incorrectly." Jayden turned to look at her, not with hate, not even with anger, just clarity, like he was holding up a mirror. "You judged incorrectly?" he repeated, his tone calm, but his words sharp. Sandra nodded, her lips trembling. "I didn't check the ticket properly," she offered. "I thought there was a mix-up." "It wasn't the ticket," Jayden said, voice low but deliberate. "It was the way you looked at me. You saw me, and you thought I didn't belong." The cabin was silent. So silent it felt like the plane itself was listening. Sandra opened her mouth but couldn't speak, because that was the truth, not the systems, not the companies, not the policies. It was her truth. Jayden stood, slowly, calmly. He picked up his book, slung his backpack over one shoulder. "I'll return to my seat," he said. "Not because you invited me, but because it's the seat I paid for." He stepped into the aisle. Sandra followed, but she no longer led as they walked together. Jayden ahead, Sandra behind. Every eye in the cabin watched, and no longer with suspicion, now with awareness. The boy they ignored had become the center of gravity. The gatekeeper now followed the guest she had once rejected. Jayden returned to 2. He placed his phone gently on the armrest, opened his book, flipped to the page he had been reading before the slap. But he didn't read. He just— Saturday. Sandra stood next to him for a beat too long. She had no instructions now, no script. She was no longer the one in charge. And in that pause, something inside her gave way. She turned and walked slowly back through first class, but every step reminded her of the trap she had once used to measure others, now closing in on her. In the galley, Avery Brooks, a junior attendant, glanced up as Sandra returned. Avery had watched the entire thing. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. "You crossed a line, and now you have to live on the other side of it." Sandra leaned against the counter. Her coffee from earlier sat half full. The aroma had gone bitter. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that her power had evaporated. Just like steam from a paper cup, her headset buzzed. Captain Hammond's voice came through. "Passenger 2A has returned to his seat. Apology made. We're cleared to close the door." There was a pause. Then one more message. "Prepare to land when we arrive. Someone is waiting for you at the gate." Back in seat 2A, Jayden's posture hadn't changed. His body still, his breath calm, but his silence was different now. It wasn't submission. It was presence. A presence that had made a plane full of adults question the very air they breathe. Around him, passengers shifted, not in discomfort, in reflection, quietly reevaluating themselves. One man in a blue suit leaned slightly toward Jayden. "I saw what happened," he whispered. I should have said something." Jayden nodded. "I understand." The man looked away, eyes heavy. In the cockpit, David Harper's face remained on screen. He hadn't hung up, but he wouldn't. Not until the apology had been made. Not until the boy was back in his rightful place. Not until accountability had touched the sky. Captain Hammond gave a final nod. She followed the order. "The boy is back in his seat." Harper exhaled, then tapped the screen. The connection ended, and so did Sandra McAllister's control over the sky. At 35,000 feet, the cabin of Flight 672 seemed normal again. Meal trays clinked in the galley. A faint hum of conversation returned. Headphones buzzed with in-flight entertainment. But under the surface, something was different. Jayden Carter sat quietly in seat 2A, back where he belonged. His posture was still relaxed, his face unreadable, but the air around him felt different now. It wasn't just the reclaimed space. It was the shift in how people looked at him. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was undeniable. And far behind him, in the galley near the rear service door, Sandra McAllister leaned against a cabinet, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, staring at nothing. The hot tray she clutched had gone cold. Her breath came slow and shallow, like she was trying not to breathe at all. She had apologized, but the damage was already airborne. And 27 rows away, someone had captured the exact moment the spark caught fire. It started with a 21-second video, posted quietly by a young woman in seat 22D, an NYU student with a sharp eye and quicker thumbs. She had recorded the slap. Not perfectly, but just enough. The sound, the stiff body language, Jayden's motionless face, the stunned silence that followed. She typed a caption in seconds. Black teen slapped and sent to the back of the plane for sitting in first class. Turns out he had a ticket. And a father who owns the airline. Eyes hashtag seat 2 as she hit post. The first minute? Crickets. The second? 10 likes. By the 10th minute? Over 10,000 views. By the 20th? A human rights journalist had retweeted it with a caption. He didn't shout. He didn't resist. He just sat back and made the whole plane stop. That's power. Then TikTok got it. Then Reddit. By the 30-minute mark, hashtags like hashtag seat2a, hashtag Jayden Carter, and hashtag the silent flight trended in the US top 10, just beneath the NBA Finals and one scandal involving a celebrity chef. And then it surpassed them. On the plane, Jayden didn't check his phone. He didn't need to. He felt it. That same instinct honed from years of silent judgment, now flipped into momentum. But the real storm was still forming. At Carter Air's PR headquarters in Atlanta. The emergency line rang for the third time in 5 minutes. The social media team, caught between a routine tweet about comfortable cabin seating and a snack promotion, was now staring at a growing fire. "We're trending," one staffer muttered. "Not the good kind." The head of communications burst into the room, holding her tablet like a grenade. "This is not just PR. This is symbolic," she snapped. "It's racial. It's generational. And it's going viral." An intern whispered, "It's not even the slap. It's that no one said anything." The communications director's voice hardened. "Call crisis protocol. Notify the board. And for God's sake, get me a response from Marcus." She stopped herself. She meant Christopher Carter, and he wasn't preparing a press statement. Back on the plane, the silence had evolved. Before, it was complicit, the silence of people pretending they hadn't seen anything. Now, it was awareness. Passengers were starting to shift in their seats. Not to disembark, but to reflect that a woman in a designer pantsuit leaned slightly toward Jayden. Her voice was quiet, almost unsure. "You made me rethink something," she said. "About the times I stayed silent." Jayden looked at her. "No one needs to shout," he replied softly. "But no one should stay quiet either." His tone was gentle, not angry, not accusatory, but it landed like a stone dropped in a still pond. She nodded. "Thank you." In seat 3A, a businessman in a light gray suit stared at the back of Jayden's head. He swallowed hard, opened the notes app on his phone, and typed, "I saw the slap. I saw the silence. I was part of it. I didn't move. I thought it wasn't my place. But silence has a cost." He didn't post it. Not yet. But it was a start. A row back, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Why didn't anyone help that boy?" she whispered. Her mother hesitated. "Because they thought someone else would," she said. "But no one did." The girl looked toward Jayden and gave the smallest nod at the rear of the plane. Sandra McAllister checked her work phone and saw the message she'd been dreading. "Immediate HR stop at arrival. Suspension pending investigation. Media presence confirmed. Prepare for deboarding review." She didn't move. The noise around her felt muffled now, like the pressure cabin had shifted inside her chest. She hadn't just lost control of the flight. She had lost the authority she thought protected her from accountability. And no one, not one crew member, not one passenger, had offered her a lifeline. Meanwhile, Marcus, Christopher Carter, was watching, not from a boardroom. From a small conference room where his communications and legal teams were scrambling around him. They asked if he wanted to issue a statement. He didn't. "Not yet. I'm not here to protect the company," he said. "I'm here to demand something better. This isn't about PR. This is about culture." He stood. "Find me a team that knows how to dismantle assumptions, not spin stories." On the plane, something shifted. Sandra stood slowly, walked past the curtain into first class, her posture no longer proud but subdued. She looked at Jayden, not as a passenger, but as a mirror. He didn't glare, he didn't speak. And that was the part that hurt her most. The silence wasn't forgiveness. It was truth. Truth made visible. And she was forced to see it. Passengers had stopped watching movies. They weren't checking their emails. They were watching him. Jayden. 15. Reading a book. No crown. No throne. But somehow, now, the entire plane revolved around him. And seat 2A, it wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a statement. By the time Flight 672's wheels finally left the tarmac, the internet had already taken off. The video was now over 1 million views. Major platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit weren't just resharing the 21-second clip, they were dissecting it. Frame by frame, word by word. People weren't just talking about the slap, they were talking about the silence. And for the first time in her life, Sandra McAllister was being publicly scrutinized not for the emergency she resolved, but for the injustice she initiated. In the back of the aircraft, Sandra sat alone in the galley, her posture slowly shrinking. Her perfectly polished exterior, once armor, was now just fabric. Her white shirt felt tighter. Her navy vest itched. The collar of her crisp uniform had never felt so suffocating. The message from HR on her company-issued phone still glowed faintly on the screen. Prepare to disembark with oversight. Suspension pending review for discriminatory conduct. Do not engage passengers. Internal escort will meet at gate. The final line sat like a stone in her chest. Behavior has triggered emergency media protocol. The words felt like a betrayal, but they weren't. They were a reckoning. Up in first class, Jayden Carter hadn't moved from seat 2A. His backpack rested neatly under the seat. His book, Things Fall Apart, remained open, though unread. His fingers traced the spine of the pages slowly, methodically. He wasn't reading, he was listening. Listening to the silence now carrying meaning. Each breath in the cabin felt measured. Each shift in posture, each clink of a cup, was quieter, more careful, like everyone was tiptoeing around a truth that had already been exposed. One woman in 2D gave him a soft nod. Acknowledgement. Not apology. A man across the aisle, the one who had stared when Jayden first boarded, now looked down at his lap, his water untouched. His silence was no longer ignorance. It was shame. Further back, a young flight attendant stood at the curtain that once divided the cabins. Her name tag read Avery Brooks. She was new, still within her first year of flying. When Sandra had reprimanded Jayden earlier, Avery had frozen, uncertain, caught between instinct and protocol. Now, she watched him with quiet admiration. She saw something she hadn't seen in training manuals or uniform codes. Dignity without power. Strength without a single raised voice. She walked forward, pausing gently beside him. "Would you like anything, sir?" she asked softly. Jayden looked up, his voice calm. "Just water, please." She handed it to him, hands steady, eyes steady. And in that moment, something shifted in her too. She wasn't just a server anymore. She was a witness. Sandra stood, her legs stiff, and walked toward the rear restroom. Along the way, she passed passengers who now avoided her gaze. More polite nods, more eye contact. Just cold distance. Her steps, once commanding, now echoed with isolation. She caught her reflection in the galley mirror, the one she'd used to adjust her lipstick, tighten her bun. But now she barely recognized the woman staring back. The proud figure in control of a luxury cabin was gone. What she saw now was a woman who had been unmasked, not by a scandalous mistake, but by a deeply rooted pattern she had always mistaken for intuition. Captain Hammond received another call from corporate ops. The flight would proceed, but upon landing, a compliance team, a representative from HR, and a media liaison would be waiting at the gate. Their purpose: conduct a mid-flight dismissal and escort Sandra McAllister off the aircraft. It had been years since such an action had taken place in flight, and never for this reason. But this wasn't just about company policy anymore. This was about accountability that traveled at 30,000 feet. In the air, a conversation was happening without voices, a conversation of posture, glances, and tiny gestures. A man in 3C slowly closed his laptop, not because of turbulence, but because suddenly his pitch deck seemed less important. Across from him, a college student had begun drafting a blog post on her phone. This isn't about one flight attendant. It's about a system that teaches us to ignore what we see until someone records it, until the boy turns out to be the son of someone powerful. But what if he wasn't? Meanwhile, Sandra received the second message, this time not from HR, from the Internal Investigations Unit. Incident flagged by multiple verified social media outlets. Executive Chairman requests full internal audit. You are under preliminary review. Return company badge upon landing. The message was polite, but the implication was brutal. She hadn't just lost her standing. She had triggered the company's first racial audit in over a decade. And the only reason she didn't see it coming was because she never believed anyone like Jayden Carter would be seen. Back in seat 2A, Jayden still hadn't touched his book. Instead, he glanced out the window, clouds forming lazy streaks against the golden light. But it wasn't the sky he was watching that it was the shift that he could feel it behind him. The weight of every breath now filled with reflection. Every voice quiet not from indifference, but from reevaluation. Even those who had once looked at him with doubt were now shrinking inward. Their silence wasn't passive anymore, that it was heavy. Because now it had a cost, the back of the plane. Sandra slowly removed her name tag. Her fingers hesitated at the clip. Her badge, the one that had once opened every VIP lounge, every security gate, every crew-only corridor, now trembled in her palm. She stared at it. Sandra Elaine McAllister, head flight attendant, Carter Air, 15 years of service. She placed it in her pocket, not because someone told her to, but because, for the first time, she wasn't sure she deserved to wear it. She hadn't just lost her job. She had lost her belief that her judgment was always right. And in its place, all she had now was the truth, played over and over on millions of screens, in millions of hands, that a truth no uniform could erase. The plane had stabilized at cruising altitude, but the turbulence in people's hearts was just beginning. Flight 672 now floated not just across airspace, but into something deeper, the collective conscience of everyone on board. In seat 2A, Jayden Carter had become more than a passenger, more than a teenage boy wrongly accused, more than the son of a powerful man. He had become a mirror. One by one, passengers began seeing themselves in it. And not all of them liked what they saw. A middle-aged businessman in a gray blazer sat hunched over his tray table, elbows tight, knuckles white. For the first 2 hours of the flight, he tried not to think about it, tried to pretend the slap never happened, that the walk of shame wasn't real, that the uncomfortable boy had just misunderstood. But now he couldn't stop hearing it, the sound of flesh against flesh, the shocked gasp, the silence that followed, his silence that he swallowed hard, and then stood. One slow step at a time, he approached seat 2A. The whole cabin felt it, like a disturbance in the current. Some turned to look. Others listened with sharpened ears. Jayden didn't move. His book still rested on his lap, open to a page he hadn't read for half an hour. "I saw what happened earlier," the man said, voice low and trembling. I don't know what to say." Jayden looked up, quiet, steady. "I should have said something when she slapped you," the man continued. "I saw it, but I stayed silent." A pause. Then Jayden nodded, not angrily, but with something gentler. "I understand," he said. And just like that, the man turned and walked back to his seat, not relieved, but exposed. Behind them, conversations had started bubbling beneath the hush. "Is that the boy?" someone whispered. "He's the CEO's son." "No, not the CEO, the owner." "You think they'll fire her?" "They already did, basically." "I can't believe we just sat here." But the most honest comment came from a woman seated near the wing. She muttered under her breath, "I don't even know if I would have done anything if it wasn't caught on camera." And there it was, the truth that no one wanted to say out loud. It wasn't just that Sandra had made a terrible choice. It was that no one else did anything when she did. Further back, a 10-year-old girl tugged her mother's arm. "Mom, why didn't anyone stand up for him?" Her mother hesitated. The answer wasn't easy. "Because they thought someone else would," she finally whispered. But no one did. The girl turned and looked toward Jayden, eyes wide and innocent. Jayden met her gaze and gave a slight nod, not a grand gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement, like a bridge between two generations, one that had endured and one that might refuse to repeat. The Carter Air headquarters. The PR team was now deep in a full-blown crisis meeting. Social media metrics lit up the screen at the head of the room. Plus 750% mentions, 0.83% negative sentiment. Trending hashtags. Hashtag seat 2A. Hashtag slap at altitude. Hashtag dignity in silence. The communications director stared grimly at the dashboard. "This isn't just a media moment," she said. "It's a movement. The question isn't if we respond. It's how much of ourselves we're willing to change because of it." From the back of the room, Christopher Carter's voice came through, calm and direct on speakerphone. "This isn't about saving face," he said. It's about saving future children from being treated like my son, or worse, treated like nobodies because no one knew who their father was. Silence fell, then action followed. An internal audit was greenlit. A review of training procedures launched, and the legal department was instructed not to pursue liability, but to ensure lasting reform. Back on the plane, Sandra McAllister sat near the rear service area. Alone, uniform still on, badge still in her pocket. She hadn't spoken since she returned from her failed apology. In her lap was a printed HR suspension notice, pending investigation for misconduct and reputational harm. She had read it 5 times already. The last line hit hardest: behavior suggestive of racial discrimination, loss of trust, high media risk, immediate relief of duty. The words blurred on the paper. She hadn't just lost her job. She had lost her self-image, the belief that she had always done what was right. Her hands gripped the edges of the tray table, trying to hold on to something, anything, that wouldn't slip away. But the thing she had clung to most, control, was gone, and no one had come to save her. In first class, Jayden sat with his book open, but his eyes out the window. The clouds no longer seemed distant. They were close, tangible, like soft walls between the plane and the world waiting below. The world he would have to speak to. He didn't want to become a symbol, but he knew he already had. The NYU student in 22D checked her Twitter feed. Her video now had over 2.3 million views. She'd captioned it simply. He didn't raise his voice, but the whole plane stopped. Hashtag seat 2A. She looked at Jayden from her seat. She wasn't filming now. She didn't need to. Everyone was already watching. Everyone was already listening. And some, for the first time, were learning. In a small corner of the internet, a thread began with this post asterisk. I used to be Sandra, not hitting, not yelling. But I've looked at a kid like that and thought, you don't belong. I'm sorry, not just to Jayden, but to the me I didn't question back then. Asterisk, and that was the difference. Jayden didn't demand apologies. That he revealed truths, and the world, unwillingly at first, began to whisper them out loud. The sunset pierced the horizon just as Flight 672 began its slow descent. Orange-gold light flooded the cabin windows, casting long shadows over weary passengers. But this wasn't the usual quiet at the end of a flight. The calm before phones turned on and passengers jostled for overhead luggage. This was something deeper, the stillness of people who had been cracked open, not by turbulence, but by truth. In seat 2A. Jayden Carter remained motionless, eyes trained on the clouds outside. He had barely moved since takeoff. Yet somehow, he'd become the epicenter of a global conversation. His phone buzzed in his lap, again and again, but he didn't check it. He didn't need to. He knew what was happening outside the plane. He could feel it in the way the flight crew spoke softer, in how the passengers shifted nervously, in the way silence had turned from avoidance to reverence. Everyone was listening now, not because he demanded it, but because he hadn't done in the galley. Sandra McAllister stood with her back to the aisle, facing the cold metal wall. Her hands trembled lightly. Her badge was tucked inside her uniform pocket, no longer a symbol of authority, but a weight of accountability. She had received her final internal message just moments ago. HR and communications will meet you at the gate. Media personnel expected. Security present for witness protocol. Please prepare for immediate employee offboarding. Sandra reread the words over and over. Offboarding. The term stung more than firing. It sounded surgical, clinical, like she was being extracted, like a tumor. And the worst part, no one had come to her defense. Not her crew, not her supervisor, not a single voice in the cabin had whispered, maybe she meant well. Because now, even she wasn't sure she had. As the plane dipped below the clouds, the familiar sound of the intercom beeped. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Captain Hammond's voice was clear, but his tone wasn't neutral anymore. It held a quiet edge of reflection, like even he couldn't fly above what had happened. At the back of the plane, Sandra exhaled. Her eyes were dry, her posture stiff. She didn't want to be escorted off like some criminal. But she knew the moment the wheels touched down, her role as the gatekeeper of first class would be over. Meanwhile, in the Carter family's Manhattan office, Christopher Carter was reviewing the flight manifest again. He'd turned down 5 media interviews already, declined offers to go on CNN, Good Morning America, even 60 Minutes. His son didn't need a stage, that he needed space. The last text he'd received from Jayden had said, "I'll speak, but not for me. For the ones who got moved to the back and nobody ever asked for their ticket." Christopher had read that message 12 times. That IT reminded him of his own past, of being 16 and pulled aside at a security checkpoint just to verify. While his classmates walked past without question, he looked out the window of his office, New York glimmering under a setting sun, and whispered to no one. This time, no one walks past. As the plane wheels touched the runway, a hush rippled through the cabin. No applause, no rustling for bags, no relieved laughter. Just a thick, contemplative silence, the kind that settles when you've seen something that can't be unseen. The ding signaled that seatbelts could be unfastened, but no one moved. Jayden remained seated, as did everyone else. IT wasn't out of fear, IT was out of respect. The door opened, and for the first time in airline history, the first people to board the aircraft after landing were not cabin cleaners or wheelchair staff, but a compliance officer, a woman from HR, and a media consultant wearing a navy blazer with an airline pin. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They walked directly to seat 2. A tall man with calm eyes leaned slightly toward Jayden. "Jayden Carter?" he asked. Jayden nodded. The man didn't extend a hand. He didn't treat him like a spectacle. "We're here on behalf of the Carter Air Board," he said. "We owe you and everyone an apology, not just for what happened, but for how easily it could have happened to anyone without your last name." Jayden looked up. His voice was steady. "I don't need an apology." The man blinked. "I need people to understand what happens when a child is treated like they're unworthy of sitting in a seat they paid for." The woman from HR slowly stepped forward. "Would you like to share anything else with us, Jayden?" He paused, then said, "If I wasn't Christopher Carter's son, this plane would have taken off. Sandra would still be standing up front, and I'd just be another black boy humiliated and silenced. No cameras, no hashtags. Just another story that no one ever believed." The entire first-class cabin held its breath. One looked away. They couldn't, because now Jayden wasn't the only one in 2. Every ignored child, every silenced voice, every passive bystander, they were all there. A woman in 4B, who had been quiet the whole flight, finally stood. Not to leave, but to speak. "I won't stay silent again," she said. "I saw it, and I did nothing. But I won't do nothing next time." A man in 3A added, "Me neither." The compliance officer nodded solemnly. "We're going to retrain every employee, and we're publishing it publicly. No hiding." Jayden nodded, not to approve, but to acknowledge. Then he stood. Flourished. Anger. Just the quiet dignity of someone who had walked through fire and come out holding the truth in both hands. Jayden walked to the exit. A few passengers reached out softly, a pat on the shoulder, a whisper of "thank you." No selfies, no flash, just recognition. Avery Brooks, now out of uniform, stood near the jet bridge. She offered, "Want me to walk with you?" Jayden smiled faintly. "No need. You saw me. That's enough." Outside the gate, the crowd had already gathered. Journalists, cameras, people holding their breath. Jayden didn't run from them. He didn't run to them. He just walked. At a young boy clutched his father's hand and whispered, "Dad, that's the kid. The one who didn't yell." And as Jayden passed, the only sound was the shutter of a camera capturing the image of a boy who had shaken a system without raising his voice. At the center of the airport press area, where podiums are usually flanked by marketing banners and hollow PR statements, there was no staged, microphone. Just a simple wooden chair, a bottle of water, and a 15-year-old boy in a black hoodie sitting in the quiet that he had never asked for, but now held like a sword. Jayden Carter didn't look like a headline. But in that moment, he was one. Not because of a scandal, or a tantrum, or even a confrontation, but because he had made the world listen. Without ever raising his voice, a journalist from NBC leaned forward, notebook in hand. "Jayden," she asked, "if there's one thing you want the country to hear, what would it be?" He looked up, eyes unwavering. "Don't wait until someone's father owns the airline to believe they deserve a seat." The room went silent, the kind of silence that turns a sentence into a monument. He continued, slowly, every word deliberate. "Every day, people like me get judged, not for what we do, but for how we look, for the hoodie, for the silence, for the seat we dared to sit in." A second journalist from the BBC asked gently, So what do you want to change? Jayden nodded, his voice calm, like it always had been. I want flight attendants to ask before they assume. I want passengers to speak before they turn away. And I want people to understand that silence is not neutral. Silence is complicity. That word, complicity, landed like a crack of thunder. Within minutes, his answer was being reshared across every platform. TikTok spliced his quotes with soft piano music. Instagram pages posted black and white stills of Jayden in seat 2A, captioned, "He didn't need to yell. He made the world go quiet." On Reddit, a thread exploded under the title, "He didn't need justice through anger, he demanded it through dignity." Back inside Carter Air's New York office, Christopher Carter stood in front of a wall of screens. Live analytics scrolled 5.6 million views, 20,000 reposts, a trending hashtag in 12 countries. And the most repeated quote of the day, "Don't wait until someone's father owns the airline." He turned to his team. "We're not putting out a press release," he said. "We're building a new framework for training, for accountability, for culture. No more optics. Real change." One assistant asked softly, "Should we call the lawyers?" Christopher replied, "We're not suing anyone, that we're fixing everything." Back at the airport, Sandra McAllister sat alone in a private waiting area, watching the press conference unfold silently on a muted TV screen. Her uniform was folded on the seat beside her. Her badge had already been turned in. The final document sat on her lap. Employee termination protocol. Effective immediately, procedural violation. Discrimination incident. Media crisis. Suspension becomes permanent. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just watched the boy she once sent to the back walk straight into a legacy. And in that moment, for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be pushed out, not for breaking a rule, but for believing she defined them. As passengers left flight 672, Minnie slowed near seat 2 and a white-haired woman placed a peppermint candy on the seat. "When I was your age," she said earlier, "I didn't dare sit in the front." A man in a blazer whispered. I stayed silent. And I'll remember that. A young boy passed with his father, glancing at Jayden as if he were more myth than man. "You're really cool," the boy whispered before disappearing into the crowd. Jayden smiled, his first since takeoff. Later, Jayden walked into the concourse where his father stood waiting. No bodyguards, no entourage, just Christopher Carter, arms folded, expression unreadable. He didn't run to his son. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Jayden placed a hand gently on his father's shoulder. "I've spoken." Christopher returned the gesture with a slight squeeze. "And the world is listening." The image that would travel furthest came not from a professional journalist, but a quiet college student sitting in the waiting area. She took a photo of Jayden from the side, not of his face, but his profile. In the frame, he sat in seat 2A, staring out the window, book open in his lap, but unread. The caption, "The boy didn't shout, but he made the whole world go quiet." That image, raw, unstaged, unfiltered, would become the symbol of a movement, that a reminder that not all power comes from protest. Sometimes it comes from presence. In the hours that followed, headlines began to flood in. CNN, "The slap that grounded a plane," and "A culture of bias," The New York Times. From seat 2A to national reckoning, The Guardian. Silence in the sky. How one boy changed an industry. But the most shared line? Still Jayden's. "Silence is not neutral, it's complicity." In schools, teachers showed the video. In boardrooms, executives reviewed bias training manuals. In homes, parents sat their children down and said, "Let me tell you about a boy who wouldn't be moved." And somewhere high above the clouds, the world looked a little different. Not because someone got rich, not because someone got revenge, but because one boy refused to shrink when others tried to make him small. He didn't demand his seat back with force. He reclaimed it with stillness. And the plane? It didn't just take off again. It changed course for all of us.